Welcome, everybody, to the Enlightened Entrepreneur Podcast. And thank you for joining us here to build livelihoods that matter, be your own boss, and make the world an even better place. I'm your host, Julie Sampson, director of the Scheinfeld Center, welcoming you to this fourth of 5 podcast series in which we're exploring how the workplace can be redesigned to drive equity and be more rewarding and engaging for workers, given the Great Resignation and Reshuffle. Can employee-owned companies be part of the reset to create a transformative impact for employees and businesses alike? Joining us to break it down is Jennifer Lowe, who is the founder and president of Montecito Estate Management, a boutique company located in Montecito, California. Jennifer was selected as the 2021 Contingent Grant recipient by the Santa Barbara County Economic Growth Accelerator for her Employee Ownership Trust project. So under Jennifer's leadership, Montecito Estate Management will soon be the very first employee-owned trust company in Santa Barbara County. But what does that mean for employees, her company, and for our community? And how can businesses best navigate this process of transitioning to an EOT? Well, Jennifer, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us here to enlighten us.
Thanks, Julie. It's great to be here.
To give our audience a quick definition of employee ownership before we get going, we could say employee ownership is where a company's employees are full or part owners of a business, and there are different types of employee ownership. One type is the Employee Ownership Trust, or it's called EOT for short, and it's a trust that holds some or all of the shares of a company for the purpose of providing financial benefits and governance rights to employees. And if you'd like to take a deeper dive into employee ownership, check below the video. There are links there to other videos we've created that'll help you do just that. Montecito Estate Management is an example of a company that's currently transitioning to an EOT. So Jennifer, while this EOT form of employee ownership is predominant in the UK, by some estimates, there's only 30 EOT companies in the US. So what motivated you to create an employee-owned trust company? And why was MEM, Montecito Estate Management, a good candidate for this form of ownership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what really kind of started the basis for this was wanting to attract and retain local talent. So much of what we do is community-based, so wanting, our workers here and whatnot. So just really trying to create that business environment for that. And so many of my employees are already acting as owners. So it was kind of looking at it from that aspect as well. That kind of was the launch for us looking into the EOT.
So by some estimates, it can take anywhere to 6 to 18 months in order to go through the process of forming the EOT. Where are you in that process? What milestones have you attained, and what are the next ones coming up?
Yeah, so we started this probably the summer of last year. So, hopefully about halfway through, we're looking about 11 or 12 months to completion. So that's pretty exciting. A lot of the milestones that we've hit, and I'm particularly excited about this, is the procedures that we've set up for our owners, our employee owners, to be successful. So just really kind of nailing all of those down to set everyone up for success.
Let's get into how the company is kind of transitioning into that. So for you, as you're currently president and founder, so what will be your role once you transition fully to the EOT?
So I'll still be on board for at least a couple years, supporting, helping with the back end finances, anything that may be needed in addition to, kind of things maybe we didn't think about in the procedures, and just being able to pass that knowledge off to the employees.
Okay, great. And how will your role be taken up by the company then, the role that you'll be playing, after you already transitioned, but you're still there?
Right. So I think what we're already putting in place is setting individual employees up to take on roles and tasks that I've been doing. And also just kind of being really transparent about what each of those roles looks like. We're also trying to form a more really cohesive culture with having other people being able to step in. So it's always just a really smooth, if somebody needs to step out, somebody else can step in and really strengthen the team that we have.
Okay, great. And then the way you're setting up your EOT, it's going to be 100% employee owned. The trust will own 100% of all of the shares, right?
Correct.
And so what are the primary benefits that your employees are going to experience as, from the transition to EOT?
Yeah, so I think a biggie that they're going to is the financial side of it. Again, going back to retaining talent here, it's just the longevity of the employee, and they're getting a financial benefit as well with that.
For our audience who is maybe not that familiar with an EOT, instead of the shares earning dividends for the shareholders and stakeholders who hold shares, the profit that the company makes, the employees will benefit from that on a regular basis. Like, will they get bonuses in their checks, or how will that happen? Have you identified that yet?
Yeah, so absolutely. The employees will get bonuses. We're still working on the timeline of how that will look, whether it's twice a year or once a year. So all of those details are still being worked out, but they will definitely be the ones reaping the benefits from the profit.
That's so amazing. This is ticking a lot of the boxes, when we hear about the Great Resignation and Great Reshuffle, workers being dissatisfied with their wages, with the investment of the company, in the employee growth and career planning, wanting more flexibility. It's interesting because I think the EOT seems to address a lot of those dissatisfactions, so to bring the EOT into a community, I think is a really amazing transition to make, and a gift to the community, to bring about new thought and maybe new ways of doing business in accounting. So can any employee benefit from the EOT, like right from the get-go when they're hired? Do they move right into that benefit, or is there going to be some kind of requirements that they need to meet before they'll experience that?
Right. Well, with like a lot of benefit programs, there will be a qualification period. But not only will full-time employees be able to benefit, but part-time employees will too. I really value employees, whether it's full-time or part-time, and just want to honor that. So that will definitely be built into our EOT.
Amazing. So how many employees does Montecito Estate Management have?
We currently have 7, and we are looking at hiring 2 more.
That's exciting. Super cool. So how did you had 7 on board. Tell us about how you announced this transition that was going to be coming up, because I think that would have a big impact in terms of how it's received by the workers, right? So how did you go about that?
So I actually chose to announce it a little bit before the Thanksgiving holiday. And part of my decision with that was holidays are a very, very busy time for us, and everybody is just pouring 110% into work. So I wanted to step back and really recognize that, and hope to encourage and to be able to say, like, hey, this is on the horizon, and we're setting this up. And again, so many of them already acting, essentially as owners, it's like a business within a business. For them, I think there was a lot of excitement, a lot of thankfulness, and it was received really well, and of course a lot of questions.
Right.
But overall, it was a very positive, feedback from them.
How are they engaged in the process, like during the, as you transition and you're getting everything set up legally and financially, doing all that? You make the announcement, but then it's kind of important to keep the workers kind of on board and moving towards this new reality. So what kinds of things have you been doing in order to keep the employees engaged and a part of the transition process?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So a lot of it has already been kind of like those procedures that we're putting into place, and having the opportunity to go to each employee and say, hey, this is what we're working on. Can I get your feedback on this? What has and hasn't worked for you? So it's really the engagement in that process. Also keeping them informed of like, hey, I'd love to have a team meeting, let's just kind of get updated on where we are in the process. So it's, not something that was just announced once and kind of out there somewhere.
So you mentioned something that we heard Rick Plimpton of Optimax. We had him on as a guest, and he talks about his company Optimax, where they had an employee-owned type of culture before they even did the EOT. And you mentioned that same type of thing. Can you speak to what kinds of things do you have in place that encourages that? Because I think a lot of the complaint that I hear, from students is, they want to have a sense of ownership, but I think with traditional ways that business is run, it can be kind of hard for employees to get that experience. So can you identify some things that you have in place that really help to create that employee ownership culture, like even before you were in EOT?
I think one of the biggies, or the very first thing that comes to mind for me with that, is letting the employee know right from the get-go that they are in charge of their own schedule. So it's kind of immediately removing somebody else, managing a schedule for them. And I think that gives them the freedom, but also the drive to really step in and, hey, I want to get this done or do that. And another thing I think is just how we communicate. Again, just kind of the team setting and inviting, everyone into conversations and just keeping everyone up to date so we can support one another.
I hear a lot from students, actually, when they first hear about employee-owned companies, a question about, well, am I going to be involved in the day-to-day decision-making of the company? How does my role change? Of course, you have the functional operational roles, that the employees will have to continue fulfilling. But how does the governance work? Like, how does the voice of the employee, how will it be heard, in the EOT setup that you're going to have?
Well, with that, we're still working through the specifics, having an attorney draft all that. But as far as the employees, we will have a company board, and, we're looking at having, probably at least a third of the employees be part of that board. So their voices will really be heard and, validated with whatever their concerns and or questions are.
Interesting. So as you think of hiring, you said that that you will soon hire into 2 more positions. Because you're moving into being an EOT, are there any particular considerations that you have now, now with this new form of ownership, that you'll be looking for from job candidates that will kind of indicate to you that they would be a good fit, for being an employee owner?
I think the biggie is just kind of that entrepreneurial type spirit and really the drive to want to do it, but then also a team aspect of it. because I really feel like that's what's driven a lot of our success.
So you talked about in your business, it's almost like the employees run their own business within a business. This is such an excellent example of entrepreneurial skills being, having an application within a business. Sometimes people call this intrapreneurship, but this is a really great example of how that can work. So like you have accounts with different estate owners, and is it that the employees have their own accounts that they look after? Is that the way it works?
Exactly. So each employee is assigned, two and sometimes a little bit more estates. And, they have to be able to manage the day-to-day operations at each estate, and oversee, the vendors. So there's an awful lot of moving parts within each property that employee is responsible for.
I'm imagining that, as we look at workplace changes, like we talked about, given the Great Resignation and Reshuffle, and employers find new ways of setting up their business, for greater worker satisfaction. Part of what will need to happen is transitioning new employees effectively in that new environment. The EOTs, like we talked about, are not that predominant yet in the US. There are other forms of employee ownership that have been more popular historically here for various reasons. But I think that there is a real role for our colleges and universities to help prepare students, for working in that type of environment. I think entrepreneurship programs can definitely help that. But I'm also thinking that internship programs are going to be super important, so that, for instance, if you took on interns, they would be able to get a feel for the company and the differences. Have you considered taking on interns with Montecito Estate Management?
Absolutely. I think one that would be really great exposure to the EOT. Like you said, there aren't a whole lot. So would love to get the word out, and, especially here within our community. And then the other side is just to really be able to introduce, somebody and an intern to what it looks like to run your own business, or the business within the business. So that would be a really exciting part to be able to partake in.
And for business owners out there who might be considering forming an EOT, I would encourage you, because I'm director of the Entrepreneurship Center here at Santa Barbara City College, I encourage you to reach out to your local entrepreneurship centers, your community colleges, because they may be able to help you find candidates, for internships that then they can, come in and intern, and you can get a feel for them as a potential employee, but also they can get the experience of applying their entrepreneurial skills within a company. And sometimes that's a nice transition, to learn entrepreneurial skills without having to start your business initially, one's own business initially, which is the way we typically think about entrepreneurship skills. So I think that's awesome that that's part of with you forming an EOT, that's part of the opportunity that you'll be cultivating it in our community, which I think is amazing. So it might be good to take a look at audience questions here. Sure. So I think I heard one come in. Okay, so here's a question. Why do you think employee-owned companies are so unusual in the US?
That is a really good question. Maybe just lack of exposure here in the US. I certainly hadn't heard of it until I kind of started to reach out to mentors and whatnot about options that were out there. So for me, I think that's the biggie. And I would assume that could be kind of broader when we look at our country.
Right. Yes. I know that, there's different types of employee ownership. And I know that the ESOP employee stock ownership plan is the form of employee ownership that took off predominantly in the US. And that is a form where essentially employees receive stock in a company, and then when they leave the company, they sell it back, and it's a type of retirement plan. And I think there was something in just the way there were advocates of that particular type of employee ownership, and it just grew. It became the predominant form once some companies were doing it, other companies started doing it, and it just kind of took off that way. Whereas the EOT was more predominant in the UK and Europe. So I think it has to do with who the advocates were, and the businesses that got involved early, in different countries that kind of influenced which type of employee ownership came to the forefront. So yeah, great question. There's another question here. Yeah, so we kind of touched on this one. Maybe we can add to it. Are there any different qualities that your business will look for in employees now that you'll be an EOT to cultivate employee ownership? We talked about entrepreneurial skills, but maybe we could drill down in that a little bit more. Like the new things that employees will need to do, like for instance, there's more of a direct line for them between their performance and how the company is doing, right? And being able to understand employee or goals of the company, strategies for getting there, how their job plays into that, being able to read financial statements, I would think, and decipher, be able to assess, well, how is the company doing this quarter, that kind of thing. So I would think, is that when I haven't worked in an EOT or an employee ownership company, though it sounds amazing, but I'm imagining that those would be kind of the more specific skills. I don't know, what are your thoughts as you're kind of parsing through that, Jennifer?
Right. So part of that definitely is, transparency and the direct connection to the employee can see, what they're doing and what it's producing overall. But also somebody's drive to want to learn, to, what it is that they like to study. It's just a more kind of comprehensive, how do they work with a team and all of that plays into it, for that culture.
Okay, let's see. Another one, what community impact do you hope to create through establishing your EOT? And how can our community best support Montecito Estate Management in your transition?
Thank you. Well, my dream is to really get this out in our community, and it's just so exciting to be on the forefront of this here. So I would love to be a role model and a leader to really get the word out there, and hopefully see more businesses want to transition into employee ownership.
I always get into like the administrative end of how this works. And are there any, as you're going along and kind of setting up how things are going to be, are there any kind of tools that you're going to be bringing on board, or any certain operations that you'll be incorporating into how you do business that are going to assist the employees in their roles?
Yeah, so I think I touched on that a little bit with the operating procedures, and bringing the employees into that as well, and really having it defined for the EOT. We want to develop training, and just always kind of have that open continuously for our employees, both kind of what it is they want to learn, but then industry specific, and then just kind of generally too, like reading the financial statement, that you had mentioned there. And then just having open communication and transparency. Those, I think, those are the biggest tools I think that'll really set us up for continued success.
So is there anything that you have learned thus far that that you felt like, oh, I wish I would have known that when I first started out, like any kind of nugget of insight that would be helpful to other business owners who are thinking about going through EOT formation or are in the process?
Yeah, I think it's the amount of time, having a realistic expectation for what it takes. And it's also, as silly as it sounds, it's been fun to work with the employees too, to bring them into this. So to have the time set aside and kind of carved out for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. What I've learned from working with other employers who have transitioned to EOT and are running EOTs is it's kind of a close-knit community, that it seems like they're so willing to help each other out and to help each other understand how to navigate through. So if other people want to follow what's going on with your transition or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Either through my website, Montecito Estate Management, or LinkedIn also.
Okay, great. And I think we included those links down below the video. So great, Jennifer. Well, I want to thank you so much for being our podcast guest here today. I think this movement towards employee ownership really seems to be growing in the U.S., especially since we're transitioning through the pandemic and, with worker dissatisfaction. And it's just super exciting that you're at the forefront of this new wave, and supporting our community in that. So thank you for taking the time to share your experience with us. And we've really appreciated your insight.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah. And to our guests, we hope that this podcast has inspired you in learning more about employee ownership, either as a worker or if you are an entrepreneur or business owner thinking to transition to employee ownership. Be sure and like, subscribe, and share this podcast series so that other businesses and workers can learn more about employee ownership. And be sure to tune in next week. We're going to have a panel of employees from employee ownership trust businesses who are going to talk about their experience of working within the company as such, as opposed to other companies that they work for that are not employee owned. So join us for that. Thanks again, Jennifer. I so appreciate your participation, and thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.